Hi, I'm Wendy Honig, the artistic director of Boca International Jewish Film Festival. We're honored to have with us Eliran Peled, who is the Israeli producer, director, and writer of Kafka's Last Trial. Eliran Peled is a producer, director, and writer based in Israel. He works in the fields of animation, fiction, feature, films, and documentaries. He directed 14 shorts, and nowadays he is in post-production of his feature film debut. He was born on May 7th, 1992, which makes him very young. And he has a BFA in film and business from Tel Aviv University. So Eliran Peled will be interviewed by John Sprung. And John Sprung is a retired lawyer from New York and a beloved member of the festival screening committee. And John will be the moderator of this Q&A. So I turn this over to John.
Thanks so much, Wendy. First off, Eliran, I want to congratulate you on a really fine documentary. And I
Yeah.
wanted to start by just telling you that our audience last year saw a film about the final romance with Miss Diamant, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
hmm
So there will be some audience familiarity apart from those who were assigned the Metamorphosis, as part of their college English creative reading courses. But I had a question to ask you, and in English, sometimes we use the expression "a loaded question." So please forgive me if this sounds like a loaded question. Clearly, there is a Kafkaesque aspect to the whole trial, and I think that was intentional, and it comes right out of his book, The Trial. But I found there was a Kafkaesque quality to the documentary itself. So my loaded question, is that something that you intended?
And honestly, it's the way the film was made is quite specific to our times. I read a book called Kafka's Last Trial. I was very interested by it, and I optioned it because I knew it's gonna be the 100 years anniversary for his passing, and I know there is a lot of different projects about Kafka, and I thought it's just like I really thought about it from like a producer's point of view. And what I liked about the book, it was a non-fiction book telling this real story, but he used like Kafkaesque writing to explain it. So it was like hearing a story about Kafka told from like a Kafkaesque perspective. And the first shooting day was supposed to be October 8th, 2023, and it was supposed
Oh
to
my
be
goodness.
a co-production between Israel and Germany, a really straightforward documentary telling the story that is very different from the story that is in the film. Of course, we didn't shoot the first day. Like on October 10th, the German co-producer told me that he's sorry, but he can't work with us. And we kind of restarted the production that we, first of all, have a lot less budget, but as a producer, I was the producer of all the hostages testimonies. Me and my team, they did the Kafka, and I did like a big documentary TV show, and we held everything, and we came back to do the film like 5 or 4.5 months after we just been completely out and forgot what our real professions before all the chaos. And when I came back to the materials, just nothing made sense to me in this story. I just suddenly like read it in a new perspective, and I said like, this trial doesn't make sense. The cost of it doesn't make sense. Like literally, people died for those letters, and like the punch in the end. You saw the ending of the film. They found nothing. I just like maybe I had like at the time to detach myself from what I read, and I was just like, I just don't understand the story. And the longer I started to research, and then I found the Hoffa family story, and I found her daughter that in the book are not even they're not characters in the book. In the book, it's pretty clear that they are like the problematic side in the story. not even clear, but I suddenly understood that there is this kind of curse upon anyone that touches those papers, and that from like a trial point of view, if we're talking like legally, this trial doesn't make sense. And I didn't understood the way the Hoffa family managed the trial, because of course they're being for this travesty, but if they just gonna bring like a normal lawyer there that say that this is not a something that could be in a family courtroom, this entire thing won't happen. Or like even the beginning of it, that if on that specific day that lawyer wouldn't hear about it in the paper, this trial will never happen as well. And like the consequences of like, it's like a very Kafkaesque, something that starts pretty much from nothing, but in the end costs you like the ultimate price. And in the same time, I read a lot of Kafka during the production of the film, just to try and get like his literature, understand that it needs to be a layer. And I just, when I read the trial, I was like, oh my God, it's like a live action adaptation of it that happened in real life. And from that, and with the budget constraint that we had, that suddenly we could not shoot like dramatic scenes in Germany. So we had like the animation layer inside, and like getting this old documentary that is a Kafkaesque documentary about Kafka in a way. So it was very it was a long process and a very long answer to your question, but I hope I
No,
managed.
I appreciate it. Eliran, one thing that you told us all for the first time was about the documentary originally slated to start on October 8th. What could be more Kafkaesque than it being put off for that reason? Uh, anyway, the thing that I found fascinating, and this comes out after years and years of litigation, efforts, with 20 lawyers to try to get and find out what's behind the locked doors of Hava's apartment, and there's nothing there. It's either in Switzerland or in a bank a safety deposit box, and I found that after all that litigation, there was sort of a search for nothing, and that struck me as more than a little ironic.
It's very ironic, and then you ask yourself, why didn't they just showed what they have in the safes in the apartment? Because I'm pretty sure if they just gonna show it in the beginning, this trial that would never happen, because like everybody really dreamt that there is like, I don't know, like the trial two, or like or like the unpublished masterpiece by Kafka. But it's
Exactly.
yeah, it's ironic, and it's also very very tragic to me when I found out like the Hoffa family's story, and especially the relationship between the daughter and the mother. I kind of
Mhm.
felt like I exposed like an Israeli version of Grey Gardens in a way.
Yes,
And I love
yes,
Grey
yes.
Gardens. I'm obsessed with that story. But because you really get a sense of, in the end, without those people, we would never know who Kafka is. They made Kafka. So there's like a really weird tragedy. They really sacrifice their life for it. And then I all the time try to understand why did they do it. And I think that in the end, what happened, and that's really happened. She was very protective of Max Brod. She saw him as a father figure, and she was very afraid that, like in his lifetime, because Max Brod ending was a very sad ending. He was like a
Mhm.
lonely man, considered like an has-been. Nobody re-examine his works. Is not like considered like a grand author nowadays. And she said that once they're gonna take control of the archives, nobody gonna care about Max Brod, and they're just gonna look for Kafka. And in reality, that what happened. Inside of the Max Brod archive, there were some Kafka elements like handwritings, drawings, his Hebrew notebook, but all the rest was Max Brod's life work. And it's not being exhibited anywhere. It's really in the end what she said and what she feared happened. So it's also like another level of like trying to understand what exactly went through with them, and do find a way for like empathy for them, because till this documentary they were like completely shown as the ultimate villains in this story.
There's a famous expression that perfection is the enemy of the good. And one of the things that happened with Kafka, he was so reluctant to publish anything because he wanted it to be perfect, whereas Broad was much more prolific in terms of what he published, and yet uh, it didn't go on to have the kind of enduring fame of Kafka, which was interesting.
Yeah, but it's also like when you research the relationship, you understand that there is no Kafka without Max Brod, literally. Like he took manuscripts that were like undone or like half baked and he edited it. He put the
Yes.
right pages. He added pages to make like a sense out of it. You know, it's like it really is like something that they created together, which again, you can ask yourself if it's okay or not, because like Kafka literally asked him not to do it, you know, so, but without it, we won't have Kafka. It's like this
Yes. It,
Kafkaesque paradox about the Kafka story and legacy.
and that was something that I wanted to get into. And so you gave me a very good lead in. Uh, and that was who has the right, moral or legal, to these materials? The authors uh, asked morally or legally this same question. Did Broad have the right to destroy this? Does anyone? Because the whole trial was about who owned this wonderful literary legacy. Was it Hannah? Via Ilsa? Was it Broad? Uh, so your thoughts on that? Who did it belong to? Was it the
I think
state of
like the
Israel?
tragedy, you know, it's like a huge trial about belonging, about someone who resists belonging his entire life and asked not to be belong. It's actually doesn't belong to anyone in the end because nobody inherited it in a good way. He had the inherent itself was Franz Kafka's parents, you know, but those specific things, the unpublished works, were things that he asked never to be published. So that's pretty much like the ironic situation with the trial that a lot of people are fighting for different reason. You know, for the Hoffa family is like an emotional and like family finance kind of situation. But I do think that there was a big emotional aspect to it as well. And you know, the countries that came and fight on it, it's a question of prestige. Which country will have
Yeah.
the opportunity to hold Franz Kafka's text? And you know, Israel came on board, and it's again like it's a Jewish identity question. The only reason that we think it should be here, it's because he was Jewish. You know, although like we have a lot of texts that some say he dreamt to come to Israel, some says that he was didn't really was an excellent Jew and on any parameter, but it becomes like a really interesting fight about okay, that the belonging itself doesn't belong to anyone, but who is Kafka as a persona belongs to his Judaism, to his country, to his loved ones. It's a really weird trial. Again, I'm telling you, when I started like re-examining the material, I was like, there was a month there. I thought that maybe I shouldn't do the movie. There is just the story just doesn't make sense.
Eliran, that's a lead in to my next question, which was it was interesting to me that Ilsa, I believe it was Ilsa, and by the way, sometimes I see Ilsa used and sometimes I see Esther used. Were those two names for the same person?
Yeah, Ilza and Esther is the same one. In Israel, she was Esther, and before that, she was
Okay.
Ilza.
Well, when Ilsa sold the original manuscript of the trial, she gave it to is it Marbach? Am
To
I
the
pronouncing
Marbach,
that
yeah.
right? In Germany, and Germany still has that to this day. And she got $2 million in 1988, which right now I'm told is worth about $5.5 million, in 2026 dollars. So it seems to me more than a little ironic that his most seminal work is in the hands of Germany, someone who a country who would have probably exterminated Kafka, much as they did the rest of his family.
Um, I think like the entire, you know, at the beginning when I read the book, the fact that Germany came on board to be part of this trial was surprising to me regarding history. But you know, even like at the beginning when you hear that she sold it for that amount and you said like, oh
Yeah.
my God, the greed but then, you know, for them, it was their property and it's okay. You know, it's legal to be greedy. If you wanna, you have a great house, even though it was like an historic house, you can sell it for like an entrepreneur. So it's maybe not nice, but it still was legal. That's also something that was a lot of the time when I talked with like judges on the trial, I just felt like that it's like an emotional trial. It's not like something that you can, it's not a judgment that happened for a rule book because it doesn't make any sense. So a lot of it, when you're saying, how could she sell it? Legally, she thought she could. You know, she also had like, she was completely certain that this is hers and she was inherited it by Max Brod. The only problem that Max Brod himself was never in a position that this was his property. So it's like,
Understood. Now, one of the things that I thought was interesting, and I should mention, my background is as a lawyer, so I plead guilty to sometimes sounding maybe a little too much like one. But there is a principle of statutory construction that when you specify something in a document, like a will, if you specify several things, those specific things should be looked at more carefully than a general term. So I want to just read you something from Max Brod's will, if I'm getting this right, where he says that it should go to Hebrew University or Jerusalem Municipal Library in Tel Aviv or any other organization in Israel or abroad, which would seem to me that given the specificity of those first two requests, that's where it maybe should have gone. And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, the judge put some emphasis on that, as did the Israeli Supreme Court, and finally deciding that it should go to the National Library.
yeah, but it's also like something that is odd with that because in Hebrew it sounds a bit in the original version. It's like either in an archive out abroad or in Israel or anything else anywhere else that like
Oh,
you're gonna take care of it. And another thing that is very weird, if she was greedy and she wanted the money, the biggest tragedy in this story because she sold it to Marbach, according to this, she could just sell it to Marbach, right? She could like make
yes,
millions out of it. Like in the trial, the public library got it for free. Nobody paid anything for it besides like all the money that the family had, they lost during the trial. You know, you saw in the
yeah,
film, Eva Hofe ended their life in poverty, which is also like, but then you ask yourself why, although they knew, and they had a lot of time, she died at age 102, right?
yes,
104. Why didn't they sell it before that and like just and then they could have the money and we won't have the trial? It's also like a weird bizarre question and situation. How did everybody find themselves in this like in this weird mixture of situation that you cannot come out of in a way? It's like a tragedy somebody writes and make sure everybody gonna play their role in the most perfect, most tragic way. So it's also for me was very, very weird.
there's a famous a British novel called Bleak House by Charles Dickens that
Hmm.
involves a trial over an estate called Jarndyce v. Jarndyce, which goes on for years and years and years. And at the end of it, the whole estate is depleted because of all the legal costs. And when I read about this case with the 20 lawyers, I said, "Here's history repeating itself." So I think there was a great irony in that as well. Um, the last question that I have, and Wendy may have some additional ones, uh, is one of the impressions that's given in the film is that Kafka was unpublished before Broad, took over and disobeyed the request to destroy everything in his possession. But he had been published, had some short stories. Metamorphosis had been published. The famous cockroach
Yeah, yeah,
story.
he did. He didn't publish a novel before
Didn't
that. He
publish a
had like
novel,
the
right?
short stories, but he for sure did not get like any traction. Even like the short stories that now we know all of them were like
Yes.
minor
But
successes, and like the biggest problem with him that he will write for years and just put it in his drawers. He was an accountant like when
yeah,
he died. He was like a 40 something accountant living like a very minimal life in his parents' house. He lived like a very different life than what we imagined. Like Franz Kafka as like a literature genius. He didn't live to see what he will become. And like Max Brod has a huge role in creating like the myth that he became. like this character, this depressed character, like taking the books, publishing them. He wrote the first biography about him and went on like a European tour to like expose his character. He did. You can say even in the film, I think we're saying it that you can say like, oh, what a good friend. He took like the literature goal that his friend wrote, but he also took the diaries. He went way beyond Kafka's wildest nightmare, I guess, in order for us, like the readers, have access to his lifestyle to create this myth of a man. He really worked in creating a brand. It sounds weird to say it, but that's what he did and what Elsa joined him in doing after that. They really, most of the work was branding in a way, and they created Kafka as we know him today. Without them, it was probably, like a published author.
Well, Broad did us all a great gift by disobeying Kafka's wishes. And in a very different way, you gave us a special gift in bringing this documentary to us. And I want to thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, I have just a couple of questions. I wanted to know by the end of the journey, who did you believe had the strongest claim to Kafka's legacy?
I think from like a legacy point of view, I think the Hoffe family did have a strong claim. I do think that it's very good that the material are in the National Library.
Yeah.
They did a beautiful exhibition with it. It's travels. I just think like the best thing could be that they just would sit with them, offer them like money for this situation. They just could buy it, and then like everything could be like end in a like the only thing that I think is odd in the end of this entire situation that it was all like they got it for free in the end, and you really have you can criticize the family, and they are like, of course there is what for, but I just the extent of the tragedy and the way she ended her life is like I think it's a tragedy that could be prevented in a way, and just make when you could go to the exposition now you could just feel better when you see them, because no you right now when you go to the expedition you know that like it's a very ironic trial, but it's a very tragic trial, and like people literally lost their life, and it's not a Kafka story, that's reality. So I think that's the balance for me.
So, and my final question is, if you could ask Kafka to watch this film today, knowing how his work has shaped modern literature, what question would you ask him about his last trial?
Oh, you will hate it. I think if I read about him like a lot, I just think the fact that there is a movie with his face on it in animation, he hated to see his photos, he hated to see his name. That's the thing. I just think, like if he would be part of the trial, he just will be embarrassed that like his story or like this thing happened and he's now part of like this documentary 100 years after he died. But I think, I really am interested not even about the film, like if he would survive to see like what happened in World War II, because a lot of his fame came after it. People started to talk to him as like a prophet and somebody that like saw what Europe gonna be. And there's a lot of like scenes in his books that are like um, talking about like Nazi concepts like 15 or 20 years before like before Hitler got reigns. So I really am interested, like if he would survive it, if he would think he's a prophet himself, like he would say, like an artist, did something. There's a show in Israel called Tehran that everybody they do something, and then a year after it's aired, that thing happened, and they're like, it's like become like a joke in Israel that you should see the season and then like prepare yourself. But would he see him like that, or is it part of the pathos that Broad managed to create around him? I think that's like an interesting. And another interesting thing is to know if he's like mad at Max Brod or not. Is it like? It's also very confusing because in the beginning, if he wanted to burn all of his stuff, he could just burn all of his stuff. The fact that he asked Max Brod to do it, that he knew that is the last person possible. Max Bod was like a huge fan of him. If he would ask his dad to do it, his father will like burn it in front of his face. So to understand that if he asked him to do it because he knew he's the only one that would never do it, it's also part of like the Kafka's problem.
Yep. Eliran, I want to thank you so much for blessing the festival with this wonderful Zoom. And John Sprung, he's a treasure for the screening committee and as a friend. Thank you so much, both of you, for doing this. And I'm going to say thank you.
Thank you
Well,
so
you're
much.
welcome. But you and Les are the treasures for bringing movies like this and the festival to the rest of us.
Thank you,
Thank you so
John.
much.